My uncle's farm. When I was a child, my family would go on a family holiday to visit my uncle and my cousins. The farm was built by my grandpa over 100 years ago. Mom said that my grandpa actually plowed the land with his bare hands. Even today, the piles of rocks are still there today. Getting back to my experience, it was late at night. My cousins and I were excited as it was Christmas Eve. We were laughing, talking. We decided it was late. I hopped back into my bed. We shared the same room. As I rolled over to fall asleep, I saw an evil, horrible-looking hand clawing in my face. The hand had long, skinny fingers, which had long, dirty nails that turned in at the tips, also quite hairy. When seeing the hand, I ran and jumped into my cousin's bed. My dad came and told me and put me into my bed. I was really worried that the hand would still be there. Thank God it wasn't. After this, we heard footsteps walking around in the middle of my room. I asked my cousin if it was her, and she said no. I still remember to this day, and I swear this really happened to my cousin and I. The next morning, we told the adults about what had happened in the night, but of course, my parents didn't believe us. My cousin and I knew what I saw, and we both heard the footsteps walking around the room. My uncle saw a lady in old-fashioned clothes about 15 years ago. He refuses to sleep there. His son runs the farm. My cousin's girlfriend also saw the same lady. Blue lights at in-law's farm. My mother and father-in-law took their big European trip in the summer of 2014, leaving the farm, their sprawling lake property, in Michigan unattended. My wife and sister-in-law took care of most of those chores while their parents were gone, taking turns feeding the animals, checking the mail, and taking care of a number of other chores. During a midweek day off from work, I volunteered with my friend Dustin and myself for farm duties. We completed the chores as quickly as possible, then grilled some food and enjoyed the lake for a couple of hours. We returned to the house shortly before dusk to make sure we didn't forget anything, checking the chore list in the kitchen. This is around the time things started to feel weird. I began to feel very on edge and took a seat in the sunroom. It felt as if a weight came down on the house. The fear I was experiencing was real, but I had no indication of why I was feeling it. Dustin entered the sunroom and sat across from me on the couch. He had a nervous look on his face and asked, "What is it?" I told him I didn't feel right. We sat there for a while, I'm not sure how long, nervously talking. Dustin became almost tearful at one point, disclosing paranormal stories from his childhood involving some sort of entity in his bedroom. It felt like something bad was going to happen any minute. But what? Then it happened. I noticed the strangest light I'd ever seen just outside the door, near the top of the porch. It looked like dozens of brilliant blue laser lights moving in multiple directions. It was totally dark outside, and I couldn't make out the source of the light. I needed this to be something rational, something I could explain away. So I popped up and started heading for the door. Dustin stopped me abruptly, shouting, "Sit down!" I complied with his request and took my seat. We sat there in the sunroom for a few more minutes talking, and even joking about what just happened. The mood eventually lifted, and we headed home. It wasn't until later that I fully understood the high strangeness of that light. Dustin and I talk about the incident from time to time at work, and it's Dustin's view of the light that provides the most interesting account. He was facing me, and his back was to the spinning laser lights. What he witnessed was a large blue box, which was perfectly formed, with no light spilling over the edges. He explains it had more lines or boxes moving inside the main box, and it moved from right to left, appearing to scan the wall and me. He states that it was the most brilliant blue, and it fully illuminated everything it touched. He told me later that he fully expected something ghostly or alien to enter the room after that light. Hence, his demands for me to sit down. Any input into this strange experience would be appreciated. Thanks. The farm haunting. The following account took place approximately June of 2002 on a farm west of Hurley, South Dakota. I was 18 and had just began dating a girl I worked with, but there was a lot of driving involved for us to see each other. We lived better than 50 miles apart and worked in a city in between us. To spare myself the commute, I decided to move to a farm outside of town with her uncle, who was a friend of mine. It was more or less a shabby hobby farm, as nobody living there was working the surrounding land. The house was dirty and run down, and the living room would practically flood whenever it rained. I brought myself to deal with it so I could be closer to my girlfriend. Besides, I was really only going to be there to sleep. I had been there about a week, sleeping on the floor in what was pretty much the upstairs living room each night, because I never made time to clear all the junk out of what was supposed to be my room. Sleeping on the floor for this long proved to be more than my back wanted to tolerate. One night, around 11 p.m., I had had enough and decided to clear out the room and move my things in. I was probably at this for 2 to 3 hours and finally laid down in my newly remodeled room around 2 a.m. to catch a few winks before I had to be up for a 35-mile drive and a long day at work. I was awakened by the sounds of footsteps coming up the stairs and the hallway light being turned on. It startled me because both the uncle and the homeowner were away for the week, and my girlfriend had no license or means of transportation to get to the farm, especially at 2 a.m. I was home alone and had shut all the lights off before going to bed. As the steps reached the top of the stairs, I squinted my eyes open just far enough to see the silhouette of a man leaning against one side of the doorframe before closing them again. At this point, I believe I have an intruder. The new setup of my room included a long coffee table against the wall to my right, upon which laid a sword that I use in my study of Japanese martial arts. I made the decision that I'm going to explode out of bed and simultaneously draw the sword and cut this guy down. I got my breath right, and the very instant I'm about to leap out of the bed, he starts talking to me, but his voice is directly next to my ear. This means in 2 seconds, he crossed the hardwood floor to the back of the room without making a sound, knelt down in the 12 inches of space between my mattress and my smaller coffee table, and began speaking as though he had been there all along. I, however, didn't bother processing all of this fully, because I recognized the voice to be the uncle's. At least I thought so at the time. His room was upstairs next to mine, and I figured he was home early and on his way to bed and had noticed what I had done to the room. Even the next day, I couldn't have repeated our conversation, but I do remember the first thing he said to me was to the effect of, "I see you got your room all fixed up, and it looks really nice in there now." We conversed about it for maybe a minute. Then he said, "Well, good night," and the hall light turned off after he left the room. The next day, I went about my routine, went to work, and hung out with my girlfriend for the rest of the night until around 10 p.m., then went back to the farm to retire for the night. When I got there, I found all the lights on, and the uncle tooling around in the kitchen. He acted all surprised to see me. It was kind of strange. We hung out for about an hour, and after a couple of beers, when in the middle of the conversation, I asked him about something he had said to me last night when we were talking in my room. He shot me a very confused look and explained that he had just got back from his trip today, and only a few hours ago at that. The flood of adrenaline that went through my body at that moment was almost crippling. Unless the intruder had bothered to lock the deadbolt as he left and knew some kind of way to latch the door chain and lock all the windows from the outside, I had spoken to a ghost. Second incident. Because I had no other place to go, and because the encounter was relatively friendly, I stayed in the house for a few more weeks. I always had to know when someone else was going to be around though, because I refused to be there by myself. I guess I was always kind of waiting for something else to happen, but nothing ever did. Then, I woke up one morning and started down the stairs. As I came around the wall and made the sharp left turn halfway down the staircase, I caught, with both eyes wide open, the bare foot and leg of a woman, under a white gown, step quickly from the bottom step in front of me. I stopped in my tracks, because there should be no such woman in any such clothing here right now. I immediately thought that it must be my girlfriend, and started calling her name while heading down the direction I saw her run. I realized something wasn't quite right, because my girlfriend doesn't wear gowns, dresses, or skirts, and she wasn't responding as I called her name. I searched through all the rooms downstairs and realized that the uncle and homeowner were both gone, and they were both single anyways. I braved the creepy, cobweb basement nobody ever goes to. I went back upstairs and searched those rooms. I even went outside and searched the property, the barn, and the sheds, but there was nobody. I left after that and found my girlfriend at her house waiting for me to show up. When I realized it wasn't her I had seen, we went back, moved my things out, and I've never returned.